All right, today is the last week that we're going to cover the book of Daniel, and then we're going to take a break. And Abuna Anthony is going to come, God willing, next week and start a series. He hasn't let me know exactly what he's going to do, but we will put it on the website, and you'll know what to read in advance to prepare, to be prepared for that. So just skipping through the book of Daniel, we covered so many things and so many topics that show how the book of Daniel is just not a bunch of stories that we can read about, but in it you find so many prophecies that with spiritual eyes, as you see it, it should enlighten us to be able to prepare ourselves to be prepared for what Daniel is paving the way for all of us. And so last week we talked about Belshazzar, which is the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, who got to a point where the Jews were despised among the people. The Jews weren't very, very loved, and they began to use the vessels of the temple, drink, wine from them, party with them, do all kinds of things, and so they were defiling the things of the temple. We talked about how Daniel came on board and told him about the prophecy that would talk about the end of his life and how now you have the Persians and the Medes were going to take over the Babylonian Empire. We talked about how that is the fall of the Gentile time. We talked about what is the Gentile time? The Gentile time shows that there's going to be a time where the Gentiles, or the people that are outside the kingdom of God, will be ruling the world. Okay, and then there's going to come to a time in the very end where Christ himself will crush that, as we saw in Daniel chapter 2, where he had a vision of a statue. The head was gold, and that represented the Babylonian Empire. And then the chest was silver, which showed this empire, the Persian and Mede Empire. And then it goes down, and eventually it will be crushed by the stone, which was Christ himself, who is going to be the one that is going to reign. Here we are, Daniel chapter 6. Something you should know that we talked about, Darius, some commentators say, is Cyrus the king. Where else do we see Cyrus the king? If you read the book of Ezra, something unique about Cyrus was obviously a pagan, non-God-believing king. He's the one that God had spoken to him and stirred up his heart to tell the Jews that they can go back to Israel. We said they're captives now in Babylon. They're captives in the world, okay? And God had stirred up the heart of Cyrus to say, you know what? You can go back to Israel to rebuild Israel, its temple, and of course later on they built the walls around all of Israel, or walls around Jerusalem. That's the same person that we're reading about here when it talks about Darius. Darius is a title. It's not a name. Darius means like Pharaoh. They call him Darius. Darius was not his name. Darius was his title, and some commentators say that he is Cyrus himself. Just some background to know. So when you read this, and you know that this is the end of this is the end of the Babylonian captivity. This is the end of the 70 years that they were taken out of Israel into captivity. We know that Cyrus is the one that sent them back. So this is the end of that time. Cyrus, the one that we're going to read about right now, is the one that sent the people back to Israel, those who wanted to go back and rebuild Israel. Just so when you're reading it, you understand the impact that this event has on what happens later, what I just described. All right, so we're just going to read through Daniel chapter 6. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, on God, amen. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the kingdom gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom. But they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God." So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, "King Darius, live forever. All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisors, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter." Therefore King Darius signed the written decree. Verse 10. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. "Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions?" The king answered and said, "The thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter." So they answered and said before the king, "That Daniel, who was one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day." And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, "Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians, that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed." So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, "Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you." Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den. And the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. Now the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no musicians were brought before him. Also his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you." Now the king was exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed in his God. And the king gave the command, and they brought those men who had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives, and the lions overpowered them, and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. Then King Darius wrote, "To all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions." So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So again, there's commentators that say on verse 28 about Darius and Cyrus, they're saying that could have been an added verse, but they're saying it could be the same who was King Darius, King Cyrus. All right. Let's look at what we have here. We have King Darius, who decides he's going to set 120 leaders over his kingdom and 3 governors over them. He got to the point where he put Daniel as the head of even the governors. That Daniel was kind of like the prime minister of the kingdom. And you look at how Daniel in his testimony throughout the whole book of Daniel is faithful. Whether he's on the sidelines, he's not known by the last king that he was talking about, or King Nebuchadnezzar, who saw him as his advisors. At all times, his whole life in captivity, he remained faithful to his God, and God put in him an excellent spirit. That's something that we have to comment on. Because the Bible talks about this excellent spirit of Daniel. I wonder how many of the people of God in the world, when people look to them, they say there is an excellent spirit in them. Isn't that what the church is meant to be? Isn't it when they would see the apostles, they said, but these are untrained men. These are untrained men, but what? They live like Jesus did, or they taught as Jesus did, or they were trained to live like Jesus was. They would say, these are the ones that what? Turn the world upside down. But these are untrained men. Why? Because they were given this excellent spirit. You find that St. Paul talks about having the spirit of Christ in the book of Ephesians. Having the spirit of wisdom. Daniel here is our icon. That he has an excellent spirit. And we know why and how he got that. Through what we're gonna read in a little bit. In verse 3, it says, this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. How amazing is it that you're going to see a lot of types that Daniel is of Christ. So Daniel was in him, just like Christ, at one who had an excellent spirit. And then you see later on that those, like the Pharisees, the other governors, or the other rulers, looked to Jesus and they were jealous, but they could find no mistake in him. So first they could find no mistake in him spiritually. So then they what? Or religiously. So they found what? Politically. They started to create a political tension between Daniel and the king, just like Jesus and Pilate, and Jesus and Herod, and Jesus and, they said you're not a follower of Caesar. So the same thing you see in Daniel here. He was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. What do we talk about the book of Daniel is? The book of Daniel is a prophetic book about the end times. It's a prophetic book about the last days. And you see that Daniel, the one that will stay standing in this very difficult testing time, is the one in whom has these characteristics. You say, okay, let me look, and can I find, am I pursuing the life that can find no fault in me? That when I live among my peers, when I live among my co-workers, that I want to be straight in my words. That I don't want them to find fault in me. Oh, I'm judgmental. Or I'm this. No. Not that I'm a goody two-shoes and I don't do anything wrong. There's a difference between I don't do anything wrong and they can find no weakness in me. They find that I'm walking down a straight path. This is what we find gives power to those at the end of days. Then look at verse 7. It says, they came before the king, and it says, all the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisors have consulted together to establish a royal statute. Is that true? Imagine that these people said to the king that we all consulted, everyone, the governors, which was Daniel's rank, the satraps, or the 120 leaders, and everyone under, we all consulted that you should make this decree. That wasn't true. But what happened is that when King Darius heard that something was going to what? Feed his ego, he just listened to them. He said, okay, I'll make the decree. It was mentioned 2 different times that any decree that is written by the king cannot be altered. Even by the king. So if the king wrote a decree saying, whoever does this is going to be killed, he can't even reverse it. I want you to think about some of the covenants that we make with others. Some of the agreements that we make with the world. Some of the ways that we step into commitment with the world, and we find that what happens is that once you sometimes get into these commitments, it's nearly impossible to reverse them. It's nearly impossible that once you build this connection, it takes an act of God sometimes to break some of the connections or some of the commitments that we make with the world. It's not one day because, okay, I'm going to stop doing this. No. Sometimes it is very hard when it's feeding the self. If something is feeding this monster in me and making me, so let's say I want to feed this monster that I am now, I'm the boss of this place, or and all of a sudden I'm feeding this monster, that I'm in charge, and everybody should respect me, and everybody should treat me like this. How am I going to let that go? You think for one day I'm just going to say I'm letting it go? It would take an act of God to change this monster that is constantly, I'm making a covenant with the world. And that's what Darius was doing. Darius was making a covenant with whatever it is feeding his ego. Whatever is feeding the monster inside of himself. So they said, okay, whatever you say will be done. He wrote the decree. Look at verse 10. It says, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. What is this saying? What is this saying? I want you to look at the windows part. What is the windows part? What happened with the windows? Okay, he looked toward Jerusalem. Huh? Very good. And it doesn't say that he actually opened them. It actually just says they were opened. It says the windows were opened, and he didn't try to run from persecution. Like Jesus. Jesus himself didn't try to run from the destiny of the cross. And so the windows were open. I want to know how many of us will close the window. How many times do we close the windows in our life? We'll close them so that what? We don't have to go through difficult times, persecutions, challenges. I don't want, and I'm not talking about I pray in secret. That's not what closing the windows means. Closing the windows means I'm avoiding persecution. I'm closing the windows of my mouth, maybe it is, to not speak the truth of what is right. Maybe I need to confront. Maybe I need to speak the truth. Maybe I need to be bold. And so what do? What do? I close the windows so that I don't want to say it. I don't want to speak up when it's going to maybe be uncomfortable to me. Maybe it's to somebody that you love very much. Maybe it's somebody who's going down a wrong path that needs to hear, and I'm what? Closing the windows. I'm not opening up the door for me. See, he didn't open the windows, but he refused to shut them because he wasn't running away from persecution. He understood this was his life. What else does it say? And in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God. Why did he face towards Jerusalem? In 2 Chronicles, if you guys can turn your Bibles to 2 Chronicles. Chronicles is in Arabic is Akhbar al-Ayyam. 2 Chronicles chapter 6, verses 36 to 39. This is the prayer of Solomon in the temple. So when Solomon prayed way before as king in his temple, when they built the temple, he said a prayer years before all this took place with Daniel. And this is what he said. And when they sin against you, meaning when your people sin against you, for there is no one who does not sin, and you became angry with them and deliver them to the enemy, and they take them captive to a land far or near, yet when they come to themselves in the land where they were carried captive, and repent and make supplication to you in the land of their captivity, saying, we have sinned, we have done wrong, and have committed wickedness, when they return to you with all their heart and with all their soul in the land of their captivity, where they have been carried captive, and pray toward their land which you gave to their fathers, the city which you have chosen, and toward the temple which I have built for your name, then hear from heaven your dwelling place, their prayer and their supplications, and maintain their cause, and forgive your people who have sinned against you. You know what Daniel was doing? Daniel was he knows that God keeps his promises. And so, because Solomon had prayed this prayer, he said, Solomon prayed the prayer, I'm going to pray towards Jerusalem 3 times a day, as was his custom. And he was praying as a captive in his land, confessing his sin, the sins of his people, and God heard his prayers. I believe it was because of Daniel that the people were taken out of captivity. Because we said that King Darius is King Cyrus, who is the king that sent the remnant, the people of Israel, the people that were living in Babylon, whoever wanted to go back to rebuild Jerusalem. This tells us something about the nature of God. It tells us something that the nature of the church, when we pray, why the church has given us 7 prayers a day. Why do we have the Agpeya prayers? And why do we have the prayers of the hours? It is every day that we are living the life of Christ, His resurrection, His trial, His crucifixion, His ascension, His everything, His whole life of Christ. But even in that, all day, we are lifting up our hearts to the one in whom we found ourselves captive in this land. We are captive in Babylon. We are captive in the world. And so throughout the whole day, I'm reaching out to God saying, Lord, set me free. Take me back to Jerusalem. Take me back to your kingdom. Take me back to your temple. Take me back to the place where me and you will be in fellowship and in worship again. That is the purpose of our daily canon, or our daily canonical office, or the office of the prayers that we read every day. Why? It's that we are 3 times a day. So every Jew, every faithful Jew would pray 3 times a day. That was 9 a.m., 3 p.m. and sunset. Okay? And also the morning offering of incense and the evening offering of incense. So it was awfully 5 times, and then of course there's the midnight. And of course what was missing, you find, is the 6th hour, which is the crucifixion of Christ. So you find that Daniel had as his custom his prayer. No matter what happened, no matter what was going on, his custom was, I'm going to meet God face to face. Nothing is going to stop. You know, a lot of people say, okay, Buna, explain to me what is like the spiritual rule. The spiritual rule, to me, in my mind, is like date night. Okay? It's like date night. I love my wife. And so because I love my wife, I've committed that Monday night is like date night. Not because I have to go on a date with her. No. But because I love her, I'm going to make sure that nothing prevents me from giving my time to her. It's the same thing with our spiritual rule. Is that when I wake up in the morning, I'm not doing it because I have to. I'm doing it because nothing should get in the way of my fellowship with God. Nothing should get in the way of me committing my intimacy with God. Not my time, not my sleep, not my errands, not my busyness, not my kids, not my family. My time with God is like date night. I do it not because I have to. All right, because I have to be nice to you, let's go on a date. No, that's not how it works. I love you, and because I love you, I'm committed, and I'm not going to let anything distract my committed time with me and my wife, and the same thing with me and God. I need date night, but several times a day. Okay, that's exactly how we look at this rule of life. The rule of life is not because I have to, but because I need it. I need this connection with God. What's the result? What's the result of that power that in the face of temptation, in the face of testing, he was strong? Why? Because he was driven by his love, not because he was driven out of obligation. Daniel prayed 3 times a day, not because he had to, because I'm sure it would be very easy for him to find an excuse to say, okay, this is not a good day to do it, because they want to kill me if I do. But nothing is going to separate me from the love of Christ. Me and God are going to be so connected. I don't care what happens. Windows open, windows closed. I'm going to worship God. Do I have this in my life? Do I have this committed intimacy where I'm saying nothing, no person, no obligation, no work function, nothing is going to get in the way between me. If the whole place, you know, like me and Dumadius, we always say, like Monday, the only time on Monday where we should be working is if there's a funeral and we have to do it. Because there needs to be a me and God time. Even if you're bleeding out of your eyes, I can come see you on Tuesday. Why? Because I'm not going to be able to do anything for you if I don't have this connection myself. And so each and every one of us needs this time. Do you have this commitment to your love relationship with God? Do you have a committed, in every relationship, there's two things that are the important components of this relationship. You need love and you need law. You can't have love without any laws for this love. We have to keep a law for this love. We have to have rules for this love in order to make sure that we stay within this love. And you can't just have laws of two people, okay, you do the dishes, I take out the trash, you change the oil. You can't have people that will continue that way without what? Love. So there's law and there's love. In the spiritual commitment that Daniel has, he had law and he had love. The law was, my law is that 3 times a day I have that law. I'm committed, I'm disciplined in that. But I also have love. He was driven by his love to endure. And it says, then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. And they went before the king and they said, have you not signed the decree that every man who petitions any God, so basically saying he's breaking the rules, and you said that you can't alter it. So they answered and said before the king, that Daniel, who was one of the captives from Judah. One of the captives from Judah. This is the prime minister. This is the prime minister of the empire. You know that slave kid that you have here? You see, they lost sight that Daniel was the prime minister. And then what happened? He says, he does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. Look at verse 14. Between the king and Daniel was a very deep friendship. And I want to talk about friendship here because friendship is very, very important. I believe in friendship and I believe that we can't live without friends. Okay? King Darius made a mistake. He signed the decree. Okay, he didn't realize it was going to fall on Daniel. What happened when he realized that Daniel needed to be saved, in a sense, where his life was at risk? What did it say he did? He set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Do we have that same intimate, committed connection with those that we love? That I have the same, I will not let the sun set without me making sure that those whom I love are delivered, that my friends are going to be saved, that my family is walking in the ways of God, that those around me are going to be saved. You see, in Darius, you see this beautiful love, friendship that he shared with Daniel. That when he realized Daniel needed to be saved, it says he committed his heart. He committed his heart. He set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And then they reminded the king of his law. They says it can't be changed. So the king gave command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the lion's den, verse 16. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, your God whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. How did he know that? He didn't say, come on, Daniel, I really hope your God can pull you out of this one. He says, You see, Daniel had a living testimony. I pray the same thing happens with my children towards me. The one day, my kids look to Daddy and they say, Dad, the living God that helps you your whole life, every time you pray and you lift up your hearts to Him and He answers, then my kids will say, that God, the living God that you serve, He's going to get you out of this one too. Do we have that testimony of those that follow a living God? He said what? The God whom you serve continually, He's going to deliver you, man. Don't worry. We're going to throw you in. You're going to be fine. See, he believed in the God that was manifested in the life of Daniel. I wish we would have that same testimony. I wish we had that same testimony. And I wish our children would have the same testimony. I remember when I first got ordained, I was invited to not to speak, I was just, Abu Shoy said, okay, Ibn Paul, go take some youth, go to this convention. I go to the convention, they split up, there's like 200 high school kids, and I go there, and I have like a group of 20 kids. They're high school kids. And I said, tell me guys, tell me about based on the discussion that I was supposed to lead, tell me about your experience with God. They look at me like I'm speaking Chinese. I said, okay, let me rephrase the question. Okay, I rephrase the question. No answer. I'm okay, let me rephrase. Like, Abuna, we understand what you're saying. I'm like, so what's the problem? They're like, we have no experience with God. I'm like, what the heck are we doing that we have 17 kids from 17 different churches? None of them have experience of God. So I gathered the servants. I'm like, guys, we have a crisis on our hands. I gathered all the servants. I'm like, guys, نقفل convention. This is nothing's happening here. Every single one of them is telling me I have no experience with God. What are we doing here? I would hope that this is not the testimony of us, the testimony of our children, the testimony of our young generation. You say, tell me about God. Just read it in the book. There's a book, something about, maybe say something about Him. I don't know, find it. You have no living God. Do your kids see the living God? Do your friends see the living God that says, the living God that gets you out of everything? For sure. For sure, your living God is going to do something unique with you. When you have a deadline, or you have a quota that you have to meet for work, and everybody's stressed and they say, but the living God, this person is always going to be fine. Why? Because they have a living God. I pray that we would have that testimony. Well, how did he have the testimony? It was his rule of life that he lived by, is that he had this intimate, committed love relationship with God. All right, it says they put a stone was brought over and laid on the mouth of the den. What does that look like? A stone was laid over the mouth or the hole or the cave of the den. So that's symbolizing what? The stone that was rolled over the tomb of Christ. And then what was put on it? The signet of the Roman seal or the emperor's seal. Just was put on the seal of Christ's tomb. And then what happens? Now the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no musicians were brought before him. Isn't that amazing? This pagan king, he's the king of the whole world. He's the king of the whole world. He's fasting for the guy that he put in the lion's den because of his own stupid decree. This is also a deep friendship. Do you fast for your friends? Do you fast for your friends? We fast Wednesdays, Fridays. We fast, our seasonal fasts. We ever say, like on Wednesdays, I want to fast for my friends. I should fast for my friends. I realized, when I read this, I have a lot of friends that are going through a lot. Here, Darius saw Daniel stuck in the lion's den because of his own fault. Let's say I am the cause of somebody being upset at me. Somebody being hurt, somebody being stumbled, somebody not growing, somebody not knowing Christ. Maybe I'm the cause. I will fast and pray. Ask for repentance and ask that God would reverse my mistake in the life of the person that I hurt. Here we have living proof that it works. That he fasted and he wouldn't even allow musicians to come to him. No, I'm committed to trust in the God. Who's he fasting for? What's he fasting for? It's not just like not eating, but he believed in the God of Daniel. I want to get back to that. I really think it's important for us as a church community that when we fast as a church, some people say, well, this fast, I don't want to fast. We should fast for each other. We should fast for our church family. I wish one day that we can proclaim that every Wednesday is going to be a fast for St. Mark's family, for our kids, for our youth, that we will fast, that they would not be swallowed or devoured by the lions that are devouring our young people today. The wars that each and every one of us are facing. How do I set them free from the lion's den that they're in? We see it in Darius, how he's fasting. It says, then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. Again, he rose early. He rose early in order to find and to guarantee. What is the type of that? Where is it that Darius, or what is he a type of? Rose early in the morning to go to the den. Mary Magdalene, who rose early to go to the cave and discovered what? Victorious. Death, the lion, could not what? Could not capture him. Could not keep him captive. By death you swallowed death. And what? Gave life. So Daniel was not swallowed by death. Daniel is a type of Christ. So when anybody who comes and says, how do you know that the Bible is authentic? Look at like the details of like, so the Jews have been reading this book for hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years. They've been reading the book of Daniel. And here we have type of Christ, historically proven. Historians will say that Jesus was crucified, buried in the tomb, to the details. You say, is this by chance? This is a living book. Our Bible, our prophetic Bible, is very alive and full of witness to our God. It says, and when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lion's den? Or from the lions? You know what he's saying? He's saying, okay, I'm familiar with the God that you've spoken about and that I've seen in your life, but I don't know him. So the lions thing is kind of a big thing. Was your God even able to get you out of the lion's den? Maybe today you're in a lion's den. Maybe you feel like you're going through something. Maybe your boss is a lion. maybe your neighbors, your wife is a lion. Whatever it may be, somebody's driving you, it feels like is going to devour you. Do you believe that your God can you deliver you from the mouth of that lion? I have so many people come to me and say, Abuna, like, look, our marriage is just, it's done. It's done. I don't believe it's done. I don't believe that because you were thrown in the lion's den that you have to be devoured. You can overcome that. It says the lions, their mouths were shut by the angels. The lions, their mouths were shut by angels. You see, God can shut the mouth of your wife or the mouth of your husband or the mouth of your friend. If God can do that, God can shut the mouth of the lion that keeps on trying to devour you, because we believe in resurrection. Resurrection to us is not 50 days. Every time you do a prostration, you go down and you come up, you are proclaiming resurrection. Every time you sin or fall, you fell today, God knows what you fell in. And you stood up and said, have mercy on me, O Lord. You're proclaiming what? Death has no power over me. The fact that you stood up means resurrection. The fact that you said, Lord, have mercy, means there's hope. Otherwise, if you're dead, you're dead. Khalas, if you're dead, there's no hope, you're done. Every time you fall and you rise, you remember, because I rose, the Lord is what? Shutting the mouths of lions. I believe in that victory that Christ showed me in his resurrection, and we see here in the life of Daniel. The best thing, verse 21. Daniel said to the king, so the king shouted into the den and he said, hey Daniel, is everything okay? Did your God deliver you? What does he say? All right, king, may you live forever, I'm fine, don't worry about me. And they send him a rope and he climbs out of the rope and everything's fine. Some people who are critics of this story, they say, no, well, they just fed the lions before. The lions were very well fed, so he was a lion tamer. I don't know. There's all types of things that will say why Daniel wasn't eaten. What do you see in the next verse? It says, he was taken out of the den, no injury whatever was found on him. Just like the Lord, there was no scent of death on him, but he was full of life because he believed in his God. Verse 24, and the king gave the command, and they brought those men who had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives, and the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. They didn't even hit the floor of the den when they were dropped, before every single one of their bones was crushed by the lions. And that is those that have gone against the ways of God. This is showing us what's going to happen. Those that will go against. So those that buddy up with the Antichrist. So Darius is a type of the Antichrist who wants everyone to worship him, or everyone is supposed to worship him. And Daniel was the remnant, the few that said, I will not bow down. Because he did not bow down, he was thrown into the lion's den, and he was taken out of the lion's den. And what? The enemies of the kingdom of God, the enemies of the people of God, are going to be thrown into this den in which they will be, what? Devoured by death. Death, and the second death, and eternal death. And then you see the living testimony of Daniel that the king ended up believing he is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. Another thing I want you to notice, last thing I want you to notice. You ever think Daniel, as a faithful man of God, felt like, I never got to go to Israel. I never got to go back and see the temple. And I never got to go back and, worship in the temple like my forefathers and Moses and all the great prophets who worshipped in the temple and David. I never got that. God had chosen for Daniel to be in Babylon to witness to the king of the entire world. Today, you have some type of plan before God. You say, God, I just want to go back to the temple. I want this great, glorious plan that I would go back and do this. And God hasn't chosen that for you. God chose that you are just a captive kid in Babylon. Did you ever think that where you're at, where God chose you to be today, do you ever think like Daniel was just like a 16-year-old boy, they tie him up in ropes, they throw him into Babylon. Babylon is the most powerful empire in the history of the world. Okay, what am I going to do? I'm just this dumb Jewish kid who, what am I going to do? Maybe you were thrown somewhere, your family is insignificant, or your job is insignificant, or your whatever is insignificant. And God has placed you there for a reason. But because Daniel knew the mind of God, because Daniel knew, he found success in his calling. Maybe today you don't realize you're searching for a calling and you're in your calling. God has given you your calling. You're living your calling. But because you're looking for, I want to go back and build the temple, and I want to go back and build the walls, and I want to go back to Israel where the temple was. He says, look what you did in Babylon. If it wasn't for Babylon, what you did in Babylon, King Cyrus would have never, ever sent the Jews to say, all right, guys, I'm sending you back. And they say, they sent them back with over $120 million of today's value from vessels of gold. When he sent them back to go back on this journey, he gave them over 120 million of today's dollars, of today's value, to go back on this journey. Wow. All because of what? One young man who found his calling. Maybe you're a young woman who's a housewife. Maybe you're just, living a simple life. Or maybe you have something going on, and that calling could be for the salvation of the world. Maybe. We have to believe in that, like Daniel was. I know when you read the book of Daniel and the lion's den and the fiery furnace, he was just a 16-year-old boy, a little boy, sent there, spent 70 years there. You know how old he was in this Daniel, in the lion's den? We say that if he was there when he was, let's say, a teenager, say 15, 16, 18, 19, we're talking 70 years later. He's an 85-year-old man. He was an 85-year-old man. Even just climbing up the rope would have been nearly impossible for an 85-year-old man or 86-year-old man to be in this. But his whole life, he lived his whole life living his testimony. And I believe that he changed his world at that time. And I believe that we can do the same. Glory be to God forever. Amen.